This is DW News, live from Berlin. US lawmakers say Donald Trump chose not to act as a mob of his supporters stormed the Capitol.
For 187 minutes on January 6th, this man of unbridled destructive energy could not be moved.
The US congressional panel accuses the former president of failing to call off Capitol rioters. Also coming up, more unrest in Sri Lanka. Dozens are injured as security forces clear the main anti-government protest camp in the capital, Colombo. Plus, more civilians are killed as Russian forces shell Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv. Missiles hit a busy market, a gym and a residential building as Ukraine accuses Russia of using cluster bombs. Hello there, I'm Raheela Mahomed. We start in the United States, where the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol has accused former President Donald Trump of dereliction of duty for failing to call off the riot. Investigators drew on testimony from top White House aides who described the president's inaction for nearly 3 hours during the assault on the Capitol. Through security footage and recorded interviews with those in the White House at the time, the panel argued that Trump gave a green light to the violence.
President Trump did not fail to act during the 187 minutes between leaving the ellipse and telling the mob to go home. He chose not to act.
So how did US lawmakers get to this point? Well, DW's Sumi Somaskanda has been taking a look back at the timeline of the events leading up to these hearings.
They cheated and they rigged our presidential election, but we will still win it.
4 days after the electors met across the country and made Joe Biden the president-elect, Donald Trump was still trying to find a way to hang on to the presidency.
President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack.
Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line!
January 6, 2021, the U.S. found itself in crisis. A defeated presidential candidate and his inner circle refused to accept the election result and looked for ways to subvert it. And a mob attacked the Capitol right here to try to stop certification of the vote. Now the U.S. is reckoning with what happened and who might be held accountable. The January 6th committee has been a carefully orchestrated production presenting significant testimony and revelations. This is what the hearing set out to show: that President Trump and his inner circle knew the election was not stolen, that Trump and his team actively tried to overturn the election, and that the former president intentionally incited the attacking of the Capitol on January 6th. Let's start with point one, that President Trump and his closest aides knew the election was not stolen.
Told the president in no uncertain terms that I did not see evidence of fraud and that would have affected the outcome of the election.
He said, "We've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence."
The committee laid out evidence that President Trump and his people had pressured officials in states like Georgia and even the vice president to overturn the election.
There were no votes to find. That was an accurate count that had been certified.
How did the president respond to that, sir?
He responded very quickly and said, essentially, that's not what I'm asking you to do. What I'm just asking you to do is just say it was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman.
And the final point, that President Trump incited the violent storm on the Capitol.
I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here.
Catherine Ross is a constitutional law expert.
Every juncture, lawyers told him, this is illegal, or you cannot do that. And so it doesn't matter what his motive was. This is like saying, I robbed a bank, but it was okay because I really needed money and I believed I should have some.
Important findings, but does it matter? Most Republicans have called these hearings a witch hunt and political theater. And President Trump has said if he's reelected, he would undo any legal action taken against his people.
And if I become president someday, if I decide to do it, I will be looking at them very, very seriously for pardons, very, very seriously.
That depends on if he's able to run again. His future could depend very much upon what comes out of these hearings.
Well, let's cross over to Washington, D.C. and speak to DW's Sumi Somaskanda. So what stood out to you, Sumi?
Well, this hearing, as we just heard in that clip there, was very much about that time, that 187 minutes between the moment that President Trump spoke to his supporters at a rally on January 6th and when he finally gave that video message telling the rioters to go home. And what stood out is that we heard administration officials, members of President Trump's family, like Ivanka Trump, his daughter, Fox News personalities, were essentially imploring the chief of staff all day on January 6th to try to get the president to publicly speak and try to call off the mob, and that was to no avail. The president instead continued into the early hours of the riot to egg the mob on with tweets. And I thought it was significant that we also saw that the vice president really was in grave danger. Members of his security staff actually were calling their families to say goodbye because they actually feared for their lives in that moment. So we saw also some previously unseen footage, I should say, of the president recording video messages, some outtakes of that day on January 6th. And he even at that moment, a day after the violence that we saw at the Capitol, refused to say that the election was over. So we saw more remarkable revelations in this hearing.
So what consequences could these investigations have now for Donald Trump?
Well, that is a major question of debate here in Washington, Raheela. I mean, remember that this committee has no legal lever, so it cannot pursue any legal action that's not in its purview. That would have to come from the Department of Justice. And over the course of these hearings, we have seen members of this committee repeat various times that they believe in no uncertain terms that the chain of responsibility for what happened on January 6th and the days leading up to January 6th goes all the way to the president himself, that he knew that the election wasn't stolen, that he tried to coerce election officials to overturn the result, and that he incited that mob that we saw on the Capitol. Does that mean that we could see President Trump go to court? Well, that all is up to the Department of Justice. They have to weigh up whether this is enough evidence, whether it would hold up in court. Just imagine a jury being selected for such a trial in what is such a deeply politicized environment, and they have to decide whether prosecuting President Trump would be seen as just another politically motivated step. So it remains to be seen whether there will be real consequences, but the consensus here, Raheela, is that the evidence has been so damning that something has to come of these hearings.
And where does this leave the Republican Party?
Well, for the Republican Party, it's been a difficult set of hearings, these past 8 hearings, because on the one hand, the majority of Republicans, we should say, have completely rejected the validity of these hearings. They have called these hearings a witch hunt, political theater. They have also said that the American public should rather be seeing a set of hearings on inflation or on President Biden's family. But at the end of the day, we have seen various clips of leading Republicans through the course of these hearings who have expressed concern about what President Trump did or did not do, who expressed concern on January 6th itself. And that's why we're seeing more and more concern among Republicans that these hearings could have real consequences for people in their party, for sitting congressmen and women, for sitting senators. So it remains to be seen again whether there'll be prosecution, but it is a moment of reckoning, at least for some Republicans.
And the investigations will continue. Just talk us through what we should be expecting now going forward.
Yeah, so going forward, the committee has said that they are going to hold another set of hearings at the end of September. That is remarkable because originally this was only supposed to be 6 hearings and finished by June. But what has happened, we heard Liz Cheney, the Republican vice chairwoman, say the dam has begun to break. So more and more people are coming forward, also Republicans coming forward. The committee continues to gather evidence. They want to hold more public hearings, so that will happen in September. And then they will release a report with all of their findings, and they'll also release some information on what they believe the Department of Justice should do. So that's where we're headed next.
DW's Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Sumi. You're watching DW News live from Berlin. A reminder, you can find much more news, analysis and video on our website, that is dw.com. You can also live stream us on YouTube. Coming up next, though, is Doc Film, so stick around for that. I'm Raheela Mahomed. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.